Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Welcome, everyone, to another week of Cash Plays, week 2 of the World Series of Poker, with guest host Joe Tall. Joe Tall, one of the founders of Deuces Cracked. How you doing this week, Joe?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Joe, this show's going to be a little bit different from what I've ever done before. We've been doing conversations with players, like I had the conversation with Krantz last week, but you are going to be guest hosting this show. So people that have come on here kind of looking for a dissertation about mixed games with Joe, we will probably do that in the future. We'll have a conversation with Joe Tall, but again, this is kind of a little bit of an experiment where I'm going to be doing my normal show as if we're not having a conversation with somebody, but Joe Tall is here, and he's going to talk about what we have to talk about. So, as always, you can email us at cashplays@pokerroad.com and send us a voicemail, 877-836-ROAD. You can check out Poker Road streaming Monday through Friday on worldseriesofpoker.com and check that out on ESPN 360. They have selected final tables. I want to thank all the fans out there because Cash Plays has now become the third most popular show on Poker Road, and we are quickly approaching Big Poker Sundays. Big Poker Sundays is about 25% more listenership. I've overtaken 2 jacks in the hole and tips from the bear, so I want to thank everybody. The popularity of the show is exploding, and we've got some great things to come here from the World Series. I am looking to have Negreanu on the show. Paul Darden said that he would talk a little bit about stud. I'd love to have Durr, and CTS and Taylor Cabby are going to be on the same time. And hopefully we get White Lime, Foxwoods Fiend, and you on again at the same time, Joe.
That sounds like fun.
So looking forward to some great stuff. As far as what I've done in the tournaments, Joe, I'm like 0 for 6, and it's just frustrating the hell out of me. I mean, I don't even know what to say.
It's tournament.
Yeah, it's a tournament. Actually, Negreanu made fun of me over at... if you go over to tv.pokernews.com, he made fun of me because I made a pretty ridiculous laydown in a read-by tournament, and I just thought it was hilarious to see him saying that, Bart Hanson from Poker Road made a terrible laydown. I can't believe he laid it down. And what ended up happening was I had limped in with King 9 with the 9 of spades, and the board came out King, Queen 3, all spades, and a guy close to the end of the rebuy period basically shoved all in $3,500 into a $400 pot, and I laid down King 9 with the 9 of spades. So I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, it's pretty close. But you played the 10,000 stud tournament yesterday.
I did.
Tell us about how that went.
Well, first of all, I went out with rolled up jacks. I personally said to my friends, like, all I need is a rolled up hand, and I can get right back in this. And it happened, and it's the one that put me out. So
yeah,
it was an all-star lineup. Like, I had a good feeling the tournament was going to be really tough. It played really tough. I had a pretty tough table. Mm-hmm. Nick Schulman was at my table. He's an excellent stud player. I played with him online in some of the high-stakes cash games. And he's just a nice guy. Like, such a good kid. I mean, I'm a little bit older, so I guess I can say that. And it didn't go as well as I wanted to. I played, to about 1 in the morning and busted out, which was exactly what I didn't want to do. And I hope to get another shot at it someday. It was an excellent opportunity to play with such an experienced field.
Now, did you happen to play with Men the Master at all in that tournament?
I did not.
You did? Well, the reason why I brought that up is because finally I'm actually in a day 2. Today we're doing a 3 o'clock restart of the 08, the $2,000. I'm desperately short in chips, and we're through about almost three quarters of the field. But the reason why I brought Men the Master up was because Manisal came over to my table and sat to my right. And he was talking about Men, and he was saying that Men is a live one in every game, with the exception of stud tournaments, where he says he is one of the top 3 players, him, Ivy, and somebody else, one of the top 3 players. Yeah, so I guess my question to you, and what I find interesting is, of course, no-limit cash games play different than no-limit tournaments, but these other games also play much, much different in tournaments than they do in cash games, right?
Oh, yes. Yep. Especially Omaha 8 when
let's talk a little bit about Omaha 8. Like, what's the difference you think between like a cash game and an 08 or stud 8 and in a tournament? Does it have to do with being tight?
A little bit tighter, and you really got to focus on your scoops. Like, in cash games where you can get away with half the pot, you can't pay that price in a tournament. You can't take the 2 big bet streets, like, well, I got a decent, you cannot think like that at all. You've got to get away from your hand early. You've got to put yourself in position to scoop or get away from your hand.
And it's, one of these situations I was saying, like at the higher, more advanced levels of 08 and cash games, sometimes you're going for half the pot, or you're even going for a quarter of the pot when you know you can get a quarter because the pot's laying you the right price. But here, where the chips are so valuable, it just kills you, right?
Yeah, you're going to get crushed. And that's actually where all the money is, because you're going to see a lot of those players getting quartered constantly or getting counterfeited and losing the entire pot because they're just seeking half the pot, things like that. And
actually, the tournament that I'm of course, looking most forward to is a week from this Thursday, which is the 10,000 Omaha 8 or better tournament. Now, this 2,000 one, we got 4,000 in chips. The 10,000, we're going to get 20,000 in chips with the same structure. That's a lot of play now.
It was a lot of play. The stud tournament was the same way.
Yeah.
I got 20,000 on Saturday, and it was a lot of play. It was a lot of play, and it's still a tournament. You got to run fairly well,
right.
Especially a live tournament without a shuffle machine.
That's right.
It makes a big difference.
So they're seeing like fewer hands. So there's a couple things I want to talk about because I played some side games this week, and there were a couple concepts that came up. And also, just the one-table satellites here are great, but we'll get into that in a second. But there was a hand that I played in a 10 and a quarter game, 10-25, no limit, and we've talked about how people really sometimes tend to get over-spewy with draws with no fold equity, and I think it's a big mistake. And this was a hand that went down a couple days ago, and I had started with 4,000 in the 10-25 game, and a guy had limped. He's a fairly big fish, is what I'm trying to say. And a guy to my right who's in the cutoff, who's got me covered, I've got 4,000, he makes it 125, and I thought that he was just kind of trying to isolate the guy. And this is something that I just, I rarely ever did this. I never did this, but I've started to pick my spots where I will 3-bet with an extremely marginal hand now in this spot if I think the guy's isolated.
With position.
Yeah, and I had the button, and so the guy makes it 125, and I made it. I think I made it 425 with Queen Deuce of Hearts.
Okay.
Or 400 actually with Queen Deuce of Hearts, just expecting fold, and to my great surprise, both of them called. So we look at a $1,200 pot going to the flop, and I had position with Queen Deuce of Hearts, and the board comes out Ace 8-10 with 2 hearts. The limper checks, the cutoff checks, and now I've got a decision, and. I mean, I really like your opinion on this because I weighed it, and I was thinking to myself, well, I could take a card here, but again, if these guys don't have an ace, I can take the pot down, and obviously my equity really isn't that bad against somebody with an ace here. What do you usually do in that spot there? Queen high flush draw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, first, one thing that my poker coach taught me is to be prepared. So I like your play. Your play, you had the read of the moment, you're looking to take it down pre-flop, that's fine. You got Queen Deuce suited, whatever. What you had is the button, and you had a read. Okay, well, that didn't go correctly. This is what happens in poker, and we're going to be ready for the change. So as soon as they just both called, now what's going to happen, and as soon as you've seen that ace hit the flop, you've got 2 ways. Like, 1, I'm going to play this like a draw, or 2, I'm going to play this like I had ace-king.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, given your reads, see, the funny thing about your pre-flop reads is that you still might have those they still might be in play.
Yeah.
They still might not have the hands you want. They're just looking to gamble up, and probably the first player doesn't have anything, and the second player was getting a better price, so he'd probably just get in.
Right.
So your read still might be correct.
Uh-huh.
So if they did check to me, I would say, how would I play ace-king here, and then proceed accordingly.
Okay. So if I'm going to bet ace-king there, just like I'm going to have a flush draw, and I actually did go ahead and bet. I bet 800. Do you think that
sounds like the way you would play ace-king?
Yeah.
I actually really like the play.
So I bet 800. To my dismay, the guy the limper who had 2,500 in front, check raise shoved. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm going to get it in with him because I'm going to be getting like 4 or 5 to 1. I mean, I bet 800. The pot's 2,000. He shoves. It's 4,500, 17 for me to call. However, the guy in the middle now calls. And actually screwed it up. Excuse me. He check raised to 1,700. So it was 900 for me to call. So 1,200 in the pot. I bet 800, 2,000. He puts in 17, 3,700, 900 for me to call. But now this guy in the middle, he now calls. So now the pot's 5,600, 900 to call. I've got about, I want to say, I think
like
I had
1150 behind or something.
Yeah, something. I had about 1,800 left. I think my stack was a little smaller than 4,000.
Oh, yeah, 4,000.
But it was only 900 for me to call, and this is the reason why I brought this hand up, is because at this point now, 900, 5,600 to call. I've seen a lot of guys, for some reason, make a push there from behind when you know that the guy in the middle isn't folding, because he's going to be getting laid like 4 or 5 to 1 if he shoves. He must have a minimum of ace king there, right? We're talking about the middle guy, right? I mean, if you look at the board texture, I would find it very hard for him to call with a hand like king jack of hearts, or not be more active there. I'm really not concerned about the king high flush draw right now.
Yeah, I'm feeling ace queen, ace king. Yes.
Ace queen, ace king. So if I shove there, he's going to get. I mean, he's already made this call. I think it would be a spewy shove, don't you think, on the side?
I agree. Well, one, the pot is protected by the all-in player.
Right.
And two, we obviously don't have any fold equity because the pot's so bloated now that there's no price that you can put in to pull him off any sort of hand. So I would just,
You would call and maybe hope that the guy is dumb enough maybe to give you a card on the turn?
Yes. Especially in a protected pot.
So I called. The turn came at 10. It paired the board, a non-heart. He checked. I checked behind. I wrapped behind. The river was the 3 of hearts. He checked again. I moved all in on the side, and he actually folded, and he showed ace-king, which he really played it bad, I would think, in that spot. I'm not exactly sure how he can flat there. I guess it puts him in a tough spot, but is that a raise or a fold for him in the middle when the guy check raises all in from up front?
Are you priced in the middle? How deep was he? How's that?
He had an additional 1,700. We had about the same stack. So when the guy check raised all in, and when we called the 900, we had probably actually said 4,000, but we started the hand with 3,500. So he had an additional 1,700 left, and he actually folded on the side. But it's almost like we weren't super super deep. We both only had 1,700 left after we called that 900 on the flop. And again, he ended up folding the river, and he did show ace king, but in that spot, I'm not exactly sure how a guy can call there in the middle.
Yeah, that's the play I don't like.
Yeah, it's a weird spot, and I ended up taking down a big pot, and the guy actually up front had nothing. He had middle pair. He actually made 3 10s on the turn, but it just goes to show you, I've seen it a lot where people will just overshove there on the flop with queen deuce of hearts, but there's no fold equity against the guy that's got to have a minimum of an ace king type hand, right?
Yeah.
And again, it just goes into don't push with your draws unless you have fold equity. There was another interesting hand that came up as well, and this goes back to if anybody ever read on 2+2 the Zeebo theory, and correct me if I don't describe it correctly, but I think the Zeebo theorem was that no one ever folds a full house.
Yes.
Is that right?
In a hand box, yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And the reason being is so basically the point of that theorem is that sometimes people only look at their own strength of hand and don't realize the type of situation that they might be up against. And this was a really interesting hand because I was talking to this kid in a 10-25 game, and he said that he played 10-20 no limit 6 max online. And I could tell he was a very good player anyways. And I got wrapped up with him in a hand. And this is kind of going to show this example. I raised it up with 7-6 suited in the cutoff. We had $7,500 effective stacks. This was after the queen deuce hand. I raised it up with 7-6 suited, and he called in the big blind. I made it 100, and he called. So the pot's about 225. The board came out 7-6-3 with 2 hearts. He led at me for 125 now. Now, I had asked Krantz about kind of this situation in a multi-way pot before. When I'm playing that deep with an overpair, I'm a little hesitant to raise in that spot against a good player. But here I've got top 2. Do you think a raise is prudent here on the flop?
Wait, what's the flop again?
7-6-3 with a couple hearts.
And how many players stacked behind?
We're heads up.
Oh,
I raised in the cutoff, and he called in the big blind. So the pot's 225, and now he leads out for 125. And I've got top 2. He leads out in the big blind in this spot here. Again, it's against a good player. I mean, I'll tell you what I did. I made it 450.
Yeah,
okay, with top 2.
Sounds reasonable.
And he called reasonably quickly.
You could be careful of that 3 pairing now.
Yeah, exactly. He called reasonably quickly. So now we're looking at a pot of $1,000. Now the turn is the Ace of Hearts, which is pretty much one of the worst cards in the deck for me.
That's the worst card, yeah, one of them.
He comes out and he bets $750 now. Now again, we've got about 6,000 left behind. He bets 3/4 pot. How would you think that you would proceed now in that spot?
It really smells like your reverse implied odds are way too high in this situation.
Would you just dump the hand?
I might be inclined to actually make a tough fold here.
Make a tough fold there? Well, being me, maybe not the greatest play in the world, I decided to call and kind of see what he did on the river. So he bet $750 and I called. And, now the pot's $2,500. And the river is actually probably another bad card if you didn't necessarily get there with one draw. It's an offsuit 10. Remember, the board is 7-6-3. An offsuit 10 comes on the river, so I'm thinking in my head, well, if he's got like a hand like 8-9, he was making a move, that gets there now. Now on the river, he bets $2,200 on the river into a $2,500 pot. I mean, this is a hand that you would think that you would let go now, right?
Yeah, I mean, that feels like a big value bet.
Yeah.
I mean, on the turn, okay, I can see it.
Yeah.
And it's funny, in those situations, there's probably like 50 hands you guys played, or that not necessarily against each other.
Yeah.
But during that make those situations more lean towards a call or towards a fold. Like you've seen him barrel off in a certain situation against another tight opponent. So that made you more inclined to calling and things like that. But that size bet, and given that the way the hand went down, sure feels like a big value bet. And
I did fold.
Yeah.
I did fold. The reason why I'm bringing this hand up, though, is because I had a friend of mine walk behind me during the hand, and he saw my hand. And I didn't even think of it at the time, but he said, well, would you fold a set there in that spot? And then I started thinking that a set is no different than my hand. And then I started taking it to another extreme. How about 4-5? Let's say I flop 4-5 on that board, 7-6-3. 4-5 of clubs. Is that hand any different than what I have there, 7-6, in terms of the result?
Only if you think he could show up with 7-6.
Right. But, I mean, would he continue to make a bet like that on the turn and on the river with 7-6?
Probably not.
Right. So,
you're probably right.
I mean, I guess my point is that in the end, it ends up becoming a relatively easy laydown now because I can't even beat like a hand like aces up. But if you look back at the play of that hand, my hand strength really doesn't make any difference. Unless I have a flush there and a relatively probably high flush, any hand that I have, whether it's 1 pair, 2 pair, a set, or maybe flopping the nut straight, is no different in that spot against that action with what he's representing, right?
And the size of the bet in the river.
Yeah,
you're totally correct.
And the size of the bet on the river. And I think sometimes people get wrapped up in a spot where, well, I've got trips, I have to call. Well, I have a full house, Zeebo theorem, I have to call. When they don't necessarily look at the actual action of the hand. And sometimes you can almost have a second nut hand in a spot, right, where the guy either has the nut or he's bluffing. So you could have like maybe the nut non-pair. You know, if you've got the nut non-pair and the action of the hand goes about in a sense where this guy either has the nuts or nothing, then your nut non-pair is the same thing as you having the second nuts.
Yes.
Right? And I think a lot of people don't think about it in that manner. And sometimes on videos, they talk about this, that, like ace-9, nut non-pair, same thing as, top pair, top kicker.
Oh, yes.
In spots like that. So, that's something that we haven't brought up on the show, and I want people to examine in their own game, and look back at some of the action of the hand, and don't necessarily look at your own hand strength, whether you're going to make a call or not, but try to figure out what this guy has to have or if he's bluffing. So I wanted to bring that up on the show. You being the founder of Deuces Cracked and dealing with, a lot of young coaches, I wanted to talk about money management and, some of the people some of these guys who are 20, 21, 22 coming into money. Now, you're a little bit of an older fellow. You've got a kid and a wife. You're 36. Let's talk a little bit about it. What would you suggest to a kid that all of a sudden he's been successful over poker, say, over the last year or two, and all of a sudden he's making $20,000, $30,000 a month?
Diversify.
Diversify
right away. Yeah. I mean, literally, like, first of all, my poker coach taught me, one of the first things he ever said to me, he's like, okay, what size of your bankroll do you operate on?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, 500 big bets live, 1,000 online. He goes, how would you feel if you doubled it? I said, pretty good. Okay, from now on, double it. That was the only thing he ever said to me about bankroll management. And it just made it wasn't necessarily that I was going to double it. It was more the theory of like how I would feel. Mm-hmm. And he's totally correct. Like, so what I recommend for those kids is almost that same quote that I just gave from my coach's Tommy Angelo. And then if they can take anything extra they can move away, make it disappear. Long-term investment, whatever, just try to grab a good chunk of change right away and make it disappear. 10,000 in 20 years and you will thank yourself, regardless of how poker develops, whatever. Like, if you can come into that kind of money that fast and be that young, I wish I put $10,000 away 16 years ago when I was 20.
Is there like a set amount that you might be able to suggest to some of these younger players? Like, say that they're netting after expenses $30,000 a month after their expenses. How much are they supposed to be putting into their bankroll, but how much are they supposed to be saving?
That's really like going to be a personal thing. Cause like, are they comfortable at the limits they're at? Is their goal to play the highest limits in the world? Mm-hmm. It's going to be for every individual a little bit differently. Yeah. But a lot of these kids I see come really fast into money. Just be really careful and take your time, because as you move up, the games get tougher regardless. Like, there's some good games at higher stakes. But take your time, be careful, work on your mental training so that you don't fall off your A game and take a big slide.
And as you move up, as the games become more and more kind of EV neutral, right? The variance inherently goes up. Is that right, basically?
Definitely. As the players get more aggressive.
So as the players get more aggressive, as you go up in limits, you're actually going to need more money. Like if you're playing no limit and you're used to playing with a 20 buy-in bankroll at the lower limits, and all of a sudden your edge is that much smaller in more aggressive games, and then obviously you're going to need more money, right?
Yes.
Have you seen guys, I mean, again, you're probably in pretty constant contact with some, I guess you call it young ballers. I have a good buddy of mine that made like 40 grand here just in the live games last summer, but he ended up spending 28,000 over the month, whether it be at Pure, Spearmint Rhino, Seamless, stuff like that. Now it's just like, what are you doing? Have you have any experience seeing kids kind of basically self-destruct?
Well, I was one.
You were? Okay. That's your good experience. Yeah.
That's why I said those things. Yeah. Call that like Big Brother hindsight 2020 or whatever. But I think around the year 2000, I just turned 30, and I was probably somewhere around $50,000 worth of credit card debt from college and partying, living in downtown Boston, trying to like Red Sox games after high dining, after night out on the town, and I just racked it up. Like I just blew off cash. Like I made great money and I spent great money.
This was while you were an engineer?
This is while I was an engineer.
Yeah.
And actually, it's poker that got me out.
Yeah.
And was just like a big mistake. Like, had I taken that chunk of change and just slowed everything down, I didn't have to go out every single night.
Right.
Like I just need, take a break, pace yourself, just like anything else. If you can hold on to in the middle, and not always, like, extremes are good. You can have good times, but just have some balance.
The funny thing is that, and we're humans and it's tough because our minds don't work on a light switch, but the best poker players out there in the world, when they're at the table, don't look at the chips as money. They look at it as just chips. They can be aggressive, and they're not worried about the money. And that's very, very good when you're playing poker. But the question becomes, and Stu Unger pops into my head, away from the table, can you look at money not as chips, but as money? Because I think a lot of those guys look at money and they're like, well, this is just one big blind. No, when you're away from the table, the money's money. It's not chips. When you're at the table, the chips aren't money. They're just chips.
That's really hard.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something I've even come across,
You were talking about mental wellness, and I'm a little bit disappointed with myself, and I want to hear your opinion about this because, there was an episode of Poker Road Radio where I said I don't tilt, I'm tilt-proof, and I pride myself on being pretty emotionally stable and mentally well. But I was playing in $1,000 one-table satellite here, and I got to tell you, the one tables, I've said it on the show before, they're just
I've seen the line.
They are
here.
just the best deal because they don't vig them. 1,000 plus 30 plus. We do a $200 last longer, so it's. We did a $200 last long, so everybody's in for $1,200 with a $30 vig. I mean, you can't really beat that. Yeah. That is incredibly. And I got down heads up with a guy, and I had about 28,000 in chips. We all started with 5,000, and he had 22. And this guy was not good. He was an older live nit. But the thing is, Joe, is that I was 0 for 6 in tournaments, and I haven't really had a lot of chance to play in the live games, so I'm trying to bring some money in. Now, in these one-table satellites, I think that you can do an even chip count because it's a winner-take-all, unlike an MTT where, if you're in third place, you wouldn't want to take a chip count because you're already guaranteed money. So I had like a little under 30, I had a little under 60% of the chips in play, and he had a little more than 30%. And I said, do you want to make a deal? And we did it straight by chip count. I think I took back 7,100 and he took back 4,900 of the 12,000. The blinds were 400, 800, soon to move up to 500, 1,000. But I got to tell you, I think I had a big edge against this guy. Obviously, I made an equity mistake, but in terms of peace of mind, in terms of my performance in this OA tournament, which was the next day, do you think it's excusable for me to make that equity mistake, to take some money, to give myself a little bit of mental state of mind?
As long as you feel comfortable in the decision, that's the key. And that's also like a lot of, I just want to briefly, and I'll get back to this, quote, tilt, unquote.
Yeah.
Like, I don't tilt at the tables. I don't spew chips. You know how I tilt? If you put the Red Sox game in the background, I'm tilting. Like if I'm not watching every hand, every showdown, I start tilting right there.
Yeah.
Like, that's the way I tilt.
Yeah.
So everybody tilts in a different way. And when I start going on a losing streak, sometimes my tilting just comes from my mental confidence. And if I can just get something booked, a book to win, and make a good quit, and move on, it starts a little it sounds a little strange because you want to play every hand the same,
right? And
it's almost every hand in a vacuum, but it definitely has some merit to carry on into another event like that.
How about this question though? If the blinds are, and again, this is cash plays, but I've kind of talked a little bit about satellites because it's not ring game, but it's on the side. I think. If the blinds are going to move up to 500, 1,000, and I've got a guy at 30,000, 20,000, okay, in chips, how much of that is a gamble fest? If I have an edge over that guy, let's say I'm, in a longer structured heads up match, I'm at least a 2-1 favorite over him, but playing 30 big blinds deep,
it's diminished.
It's greatly diminished.
Yeah.
So I'm actually possibly not giving up that much of an equity edge if I feel like a bad beat is going to crush me, right, mentally.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I
totally agree.
I feel a little bit better about that.
You should feel fine about it.
We are going to be right back. We're going to take a little break. We've got a voicemail, and we're going to catch up on some emails right here from the Rio on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays.
Scott Huff here from Two Jacks in the Hole.
And Joe Stapleton also present and accounted for.
Joe, I have some bad news. I am leaving the USA.
That's actually very good news, Scott, because outside the U.S. is the only place you can play on Titan Poker.
Actually, I heard about that, Joe. PokerRoad.com and Titan Poker have teamed up to bring you an exclusive $10,000 package to the World Series of Poker.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty ridiculous package. You get 5 nights in Vegas, flights to and from whatever country you win it from, appear as a special guest on a Poker Road program. Get picked up at the airport in a limo. That's my favorite part. But Scott, I know your favorite part is you had a coaching lesson from Joe Seebach, dinner with him and the Poker Road crew, and let's not forget the fact that you get a $1,500 buy-in to a bracelet event, No Limit Hold'em number 53.
It's easy to sign up. All you have to do is download and install Titan Poker. Use bonus code POKERROAD, one word. Deposit at least $50 to your Titan Poker account, and then earn the most points between now and June 20th, and you get that $10,000 package to the World Series of Poker.
And remember, guys, this contest is only eligible for non-U.S. residents, so make sure you sign up with bonus code POKERROAD. You can't afford not to.
Cash Plays.
And we are back here on Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson with the guest host, Joe Tall. And Joe, we just had Ali Najad come by, and he was like, I've played with you a bunch on Full Tilt. Of course, Ali's got his 816 horse table on Full Tilt.
Yes, it's a good table. I'm glad he opened it up.
And then Alan Kessler, Chainsaw, came by and he said, Bart, you can say on your Cash Plays shows, I've had 100 straight winning sessions on Full Tilt. He plays stud 8 or better.
Those games are good. And he plays really well.
So that's kind of interesting. Of course, you can send us voicemails at 877-836-ROAD, 877-836-ROAD. Let's have a listen to this. Okay.
Hi, this is for Bart and Cash Plays. Bart, whenever you're talking about hands specifically that you've played as you use in examples, you have a lot of detail. So my question is, how are you taking notes? Are you doing it at the table? Are you writing down a lot of hands, just key hands? Are you using like a recorder or something? And do a lot of people do it where you play? I guess you play with a lot of regulars. So, do a lot of people do it? Do people look at you funny when you're taking notes? Any help you could get on that? I think that's something that I need to get a little better at. So, this is Jamie from Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and keep up the good work.
Well, that's interesting, Joe. In the era of online poker, obviously you've got Poker Tracker, and you can go back and look at all of your stats and look how you play hands. But this guy's got a question that it seems like specifically for live poker. Now, I'm not one that necessarily takes notes at the table, but when you were coming up playing live, how did you go about recording certain situations against players? Did you just do it mentally? How did it work for you?
Well, I'm really a stud player at heart, so I actually have an excellent memory, which is actually kind of a key component to playing decent stud. And I was never one to actually write things down, but I've seen it discussed, and I've discussed it with some of my poker students. If you want to work on your game and write down certain situations so you can run by hands with a coach or post them on a forum, etc., you're totally fine with bringing a notebook. You can be discreet about it. People ask you about it, tell them you blog.
Right.
Tell them you're writing down a grocery list. Like, I got a blog I write. And then give them some www URL, make it up.
Right.
So I can see all different ways of recording it. I've seen people record it in text messages on their phone. Mm-hmm. And, just learn a shorthand for poker, like, KH, thing like that for King of Hearts, and just write it. You can write yourself a little text message on your phone, things like that, or step away from the table for a couple minutes and write something down. You can do all sorts of different ways if you want to work on your live game and record hands.
I'll be honest with you. When I first heard that email, I was like, I was like, who really takes notes at the table? But actually, while you were talking about that, and I was thinking, is that I can't even count how many times I've actually tried to relay a hand to somebody that I want an opinion about, but I don't have the action 100% correct, and it gets ruined in my translation because I don't have the specific action. So that might be something where, again, I'm never going to be that guy that necessarily takes notes at the table. If I've got some sort of thought, maybe I'll go back home and write it down. But if I see a real interesting hand go down, and maybe it's not even specifically with me, but maybe against two other players, and I want to get that action down right, then I can definitely see that. Because, this guy was saying that, I tend to remember hands in detail. But again, I kind of screwed up, like with that Queen Deuce of Hearts hand. I kind of screwed up the stack size, and I thought it kind of took away a little bit from, the relative, story of the hand. So, very, very good voicemail. And, be kind of thinking about that in the future. Again,
I've seen people. I've even seen players at higher stakes.
Yeah.
Literally diligently take notes discreetly on the table, and when they're asked about it, they just like, I write certain things down. Can I take a look? Well, I'd rather not. Just be really friendly and appropriate about it. Like, usually everybody slowly forget about it. So.
Again, voicemail is 877-836-ROAD, and you can email us at cashplays@pokerroad.com. We're going to take a couple of emails here, and again, I apologize. Last week we didn't take any emails because of our long discussion with Krantz. First email here comes from Vlad in Toronto, Joe, and he says, and this is really kind of fits into what we're doing here at the World Series of Poker, so there's a lot of side action going on. He says, what are the biggest mistakes tournament players make when they try out cash games, and how can we as cash game players exploit them? Now, this is a situation with, it can be no limit hold'em, it can be the mixed games, that you play in. We're playing a tournament here, we get knocked out, we play cash games, or maybe we've taken a day off from tournament, and then we've got a guy come in from the tournament, and all of a sudden here, yo, Gene Todd, bro, what's going on? All of a sudden we need, we want to make some money off these guys. For me, in No Limit Hold'em, it seems that they overvalue their hands, and they put way, way too much money in with like a one-pair type hand. In the types of games that you play in, where do you see some of the errors? Same type of thing?
One, they tend to be a little more inclined to try to get to showdown cheaply. I see these type of things all the time at the higher stake cash games. When you get a strict kind of tournament player, they when it gets to the showdown or near the showdown, they're like, "What's the check call?" And so I think your point that you might be getting at is to make sure that you value bet thinly, and that's like one of the key skill to survive in cash games and be an excellent cash game player is to know your opponent well enough that when you place a bet, they're going to pay off with a lesser hand, and you see that often with a lot of strictly tournament players.
The other thing too that I've noticed, and we talked about this from the start, is fast playing your hands early in No Limit Hold'em cash games. Now, a lot of times against a seasoned cash game player, if you get a lot of money in on the flop, sometimes they'll just get away from like a one-pair type hand. It never used to be the case a few years ago, but now players are really aware of pocket control and stuff. But I find that if you've got a guy in there with an overpair and he's a tournament player, if you just get money in, and a lot of the times these guys aren't playing deep in cash games. Tournament player, he might come in with 100 big blinds. If you get the money in early in the hand and you don't give them an excuse to fold the hand, like you don't raise the turn, they're like, well, how can I be good here with one pair? Then they're always gonna pay you off. And, when you see, in terms of the games that you play, again, the mixed games, but the limit games. Now, in limit, it's sometimes a little bit tough to overvalue a hand because it's limit. But you say like a tournament stud player come in or a tournament 08 player come in and play in the cash games. Where are their leaks?
Same thing. Showdown.
Yeah.
Yep. Almost straight across the board.
So it's basically a showdown issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
a little bit too passive, and they try to get to showdown cheaply.
Well, thank you very, very much for your email, Vlad. Another email comes from Michael. He says, I have a question regarding the poker economy. As the country's economic situation continues to tighten and fuel prices keep going up, at what stakes do you feel the games become affected first, and to what degree? I've noticed that I'm staring at a higher percentage of regulars at my table 1, 2, and 2, 5. Have you noticed the same at higher stakes? Now, this is kind of it might be a tough question for you, Joe, because online play, I would think that the online bill has much, much more to do with the toughness of online play. But have you just noticed over the last year that there are less casual players because just money seems to be getting tighter?
That's pretty interesting because recently I was starting to witness that online poker was getting a little bit better, probably within the last 6 months. But that is coming off the first 12 months, post legislation. I've actually put some thought about this. I have a minor in economics, and I think about these type of things all the time, oddly. And it's pretty interesting question because what also is happening at the same time is that the rakes have gone up in live games like at Commerce recently. And so this is going to have a really big effect on that lower level. And like in any sort of economy, when you take out the base of it's kind of like a food pyramid, like a chain of a hierarchy. So when you start whittling away at that lower level, it's slowly going to trickle up through the whole system.
Yeah.
There's a couple things that online that might change that, like the influence of the market opening up to China. And I actually was just recently looking at some PokerStars games, and there was 3 players from China on the same table, which I was just flat out amazed in a 30-60 stud game. So there's going to be some different influence and stuff, but for live games, I can actually... His fears are kind of correct, and with the rakes going up, especially at those lower limits, it's with the economy and everything getting a tighter squeeze, it's going to make a big change for a little while.
Let's talk about a little bit about that rake. I mean, I have to tell you, I get dozens of emails a week, and the most the same email comes in at least 5 times a week, and that's Bart. I am playing 1-2 or 2-3 no limit live, and we've had many discussions on the show at the beatability of those games live. Because I came out and I said, in a 1-2 $200 cap game, the game cannot be beaten with a rake structure, at least an LA rake structure. LA rake structure is a at a 1-2, it's either a $4 or $5 flat drop, regardless of pot size, plus a $1 bad beat jackpot. In my opinion, when you're playing with a $200 stack, that game cannot be beaten. And people are like, well, yeah, but I don't understand. I beat the game for $19-20 an hour. And I say, well, maybe, if you go up and now the game's on, capped at 300, you might be able to make $18-19 an hour, but you're never going to be able to build a bankroll like that, right?
No,
making $18-19 an hour,
It's really tough because there's also the kind of total twist to it is that the game's a lot better.
Right, of course. Right.
But it is a pretty tight dance.
Yeah.
And if you're a live player, and this sounds kind of corny, kind of simple, sit in the 9 or 10 seat and just kind of keep your eye on the hole.
Yeah.
Keep your eye on the hole, and I dare you to write down how much money you think that goes in.
Yeah.
Watch the hole. I'm dead serious. It's that simple. Sit in that 9 or 10 seat. If you get that seat once sometime, take a little mental note and watch the hole right there next to the dealer and just watch it go in. Watch it go down. Sooner or later, you're going to realize that after 20 hands, if you're in a $100 no-limit buy-in table, they just took a whole stack off the table.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And that's insane.
I actually, just recently, it's a recent phenomenon for me, I started getting invited to some Hollywood home games, with some celebrities and stuff, and the games are relatively soft, but the rake structure is such that it's so much we might be playing in a 10-20 game with a $3,000 cap, and they're taking $50 out of the pot.
That's insane.
$50 out of the pot. And, they're giving, we're playing with $25 chips, $5 chips, and, $100 chips. And there might have been $500 or $600 in red chips out there, $5 chips. And then after a couple hours, all the chips are gone. And, the guys who aren't realizing, they're scratching their hands where all the red chips go? Yeah, they're down the drop box. Same type of thing. If you're playing in a 200 cap max buy-in game and they're taking $5 every single hand, then they're taking basically a stack and a half every. Well, if you play 30 hands an hour, they're almost taking a stack every hour. You play that game for 12. You play that game for 12 hours. The entire table's money's gone. The entire table's money's gone.
It's amazing.
Now, I'm not necessarily all that familiar with the online rake and how much it's gone up, but again, one of the interesting things that Townsend said when we had the conversation with him is that he wouldn't recommend playing heads up below 5-10 no limit because of the rake structure.
Totally true.
And he says there's enough good games at the 6 max level where it's unneeded.
Really interesting. Yeah. I've been calling it the kind of like the rake block. Mm-hmm. Online, and this is from the limit, but it probably goes for the same with the no limit games.
Yeah.
And there's the micro limits, like the quarter 50-cent type games, and then when you get to the $1 $2 kind of in that area, the 2-4, the rake jumps up to the same levels as the 5-10 and 10-20 limit games online, and 15-30 limit games online. It's so the 2, 4, and 3, 6 players are like, it's almost like a brick wall. That wall is almost it's really hard to hurdle. Granted, there's rakeback programs and things like that help them get over that wall. But I see poker students come to me all the time, and they feel discouraged. They're like, why, I played so well to this part of my poker building, and now I'm stuck here. I'm like, you're stuck here because the rake is huge. Like, whatever you can do, if you can move up quickly, try to do so.
So it's almost an issue where there's a certain level where it's tougher to beat, even though it's a lower level, and you just want to get out of that level to a bigger stacked game where the ratio of rake to limit size is smaller,
yes.
right?
We are above the bubble.
And what is the rake running, say, like at a 4-8 limit game or a 5-10 limit game right now, like on Stars or on Full Tilt?
It's running $3 a hand, which is the same as 5, 10, 10, 20, 15, 30.
And then does it move up at 30-60 to like $4 a hand?
I think it doesn't move up until like 50-100-ish.
So you could be playing 30-60 with the same rake that you're playing with at 5, at 4-8?
At 4-8.
Well, there you go, right? I mean, that's a
3-6, yeah.
And then when those guys are multi-tabling, like all, they're just paying tons and tons and tons of rake.
Compared to the bet sizes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Joe Tall, I appreciate you coming on the show and guest hosting. I want your everybody's opinions about, because again, this was kind of an experiment, this show, and I want to know what people thought about it, because if people like it, I'm more than willing to do it again, and I hope that we can have you on for kind of a conversation dissertation about mixed games. Go to deucescrack.com, check it out, and Joe, hopefully I can take my $3,800 stack here, and then the second day of the 08 restart, double through, and maybe I'll actually maybe cash here. Boy, it's a far cry from last year when I hit 2 final tables right away.
Oh.
And as opposed to right now when I'm 0 for 6 in the tournament.
I can tell you right now, I cashed in the 08 tournament last week.
Yeah.
And on day 1, I was all in 6 times. And on day 2, I was all in 20 times. And I came in 22nd out of 822 people.
Wow.
So there's plenty of hope for you, Bart.
All right. Thanks a lot. Well, we will see you next week. Again, we're going to have some great guests on in the future. Hopefully, Negranu, some guys from Deuces Crack, White Lime, Foxwood Fiend, CTS, Taylor Cowley. Hopefully, have a conversation about stud with Paul Darden. And, who knows? Maybe a Durr, maybe some other big guy that's being profiled on Poker Road right now. Who knows? We'll keep our fingers crossed. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you very much.